In this problem, we want to find all zeros of the function and write the polynomial as a product of linear factors. So in order to do this, I'm going to look first to see if I can factor this. Normally, when we have 4 terms, we can factor by grouping, but that's not going to work here. If I try that, I'll get x squared times x plus 10, and we can see immediately the only thing we could factor out of the second group is a 1, and that's not helping anything, so we can stop that. So then what do? Well, I can use the rational zeros theorem, and we know that p is equal to 34. That comes from the last term. Q is the coefficient of the highest degree term, so that's going to be 1. And so my possible rational zeros are plus and minus 1, plus and minus 2. Let's see what else goes into 34. Plus and minus 17, and plus and minus 34. So these are values that I'm going to look for to see if they are zeros of the function. If I didn't have a graphing calculator, I could just go through and try them one by one using synthetic division. But in order to speed up this process, I'm going to go to my calculator. In y equals, I'm going to let y1 equal my function. And then I go to the table by pressing second and graph. And I look to see when we have our x values and values for y1, I'm looking to see what x value is paired with a y value of 0. And what we find when we do this is that we get x equals -2. So now I have 1 0 of my rational function. Or polynomial function. Okay, so what do I do with that -2? Well, I can use synthetic division in order to factor this function. So the 1 comes straight down, and we have 1. Now I'm going to multiply -2 times 1, gives me -2, and that's what I put here. And then I add the 10 and the -2, and I get a positive 8. Now I'll multiply -2 times 8, and I get -16. And I add the 33 and the -16 and get 17. And then multiply -2 times 17, and I get -34, which is what we were expecting to see. So at this point, I can factor into x minus -2, because that was my 0. And then we have x squared plus 8x plus 17. And that's from what was left here. The remainder is 0, so we don't have any remainder term there. So now I need to factor the x squared plus 8x plus 17, because it said to write as a product of linear factors. So that means I need all my factors to be first degree. And this may turn out to include factors that are irrational or possibly imaginary. So I'm going to clear a space, and I want to factor that trinomial x squared plus 8x plus 17. Now, to factor this, we're going to use the quadratic formula because it doesn't factor nicely. So, we have A equals 1, B equals 8, and C equals 17. And so x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and that's all over 2 times a. And I get negative 8 plus or minus square root of 64 minus 68, and that's all over 2. And when I subtract 64 and 68, I get negative 4. So now I have negative 8 plus or minus the square root of negative 4, and that's all over 2. Now I'll take the square root of negative 4, and that's going to be 2i. And we're still all over 2, so we divide and get negative 4 plus or minus I. So now I can finish factoring. I have x minus a negative 2. We're going to make that a plus 2. So we have x plus 2. And then I have x minus, and I'm going to take negative 4 plus I. And then we'll have x minus negative 4 minus I. And you can distribute the negative there or leave it as it is. Either way is perfectly fine. And that's my final answer.